Hey everyone, thank you so much for coming to this uncommon conversation with Francisco Cruz-Mendoza. Um, Before we kick off, just a quick introduction. I am Rebecca, the head of the Uncommon community at Common Room, and that's enough for me. We are here today to talk about and to talk with Francisco, who's a community manager at Notion and has a deep wealth of expertise across a lot of spaces that bring together what he's going to talk about today and influence the way that he approaches his work at Notion. So he's been a community operations manager, a social media lead, a community consultant. He has a background that encompasses many experiences and cultures. So he brings a rich amount of diverse thought and experience into his work at Notion and what it means to build international communities. And perhaps most importantly, he is a Guinness World Record holder. So before we go anywhere, I would love for you to introduce yourself, Francisco, and maybe tell us a little bit about that very special fact.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm Francisco Cruz. I've been in community for a little over 10 years now. I like to say that I've been in community since it was just a glorified name for an intern. In the early days where community manager could mean anyone from someone that's running, a hotel front desk to, somebody that's, running social media. That's what we're doing today. So it's been really, really great to kind of see everything evolve over time. And yeah, I've really been a community person from day one. I've been very fortunate to kind of land in in this field of work just because I'm very passionate about it, which kind of goes to my world record, which is, it sounds way cooler than it actually is, but I always thought it was like a fun way to see if people were actually looking at my, LinkedIn or whatever, which you obviously have. So thank you. But yeah, so in 2013, in the golden era, I think, of Reddit. Basically, they used to do this giant secret Santa exchange, and they did this massive one. I think they really kind of pushed it out to hit as many of the members as possible. And basically, if you're a part of it and you sent and received a gift, you would be considered like a qualifier. And then basically, we were a part of it. I think it was, I don't want to say the number. I think it was like 30,000 people, I want to say. Maybe it's less. But since I was a part of it, I am a contributor to that world record. So I got a little certificate and everything else that comes with it. And for me, as a 9-year-old who went to classic book fairs, that's like the coolest thing ever. So very, very happy.
Oh my gosh, classic book fairs. Well, 'tis the season. It sounds like this is kind of like your anniversary, or at least this season is your anniversary of hitting that Guinness, being a part of that Guinness World Record. So that's really
Yeah.
cool. This is perfect
Yeah, no,
timing.
it's awesome. It's been great. So yeah, so it's been a big Redditor for a long time. Always been in the communities, online communities, and everywhere else that I can.
Yeah, and I'm going to dive into how you think about community at Notion. But I do think, and I said this on purpose, there are so many aspects that go into community building, and so your range of it, right, from doing consulting to working at Startup Grind or founding it, right, to doing like tech experiences, I believe in Mexico, to being a social media lead in community operations. Like a lot of times, right, there's this sort of, I don't want to say they're memes, but people are like, hey, as a community manager, I do social media, I do events, I do content creation. You host podcasts, you are a spokesperson, and also like, congratulations, you hired a marketing team. Um, and so I'm super excited to see to hear from you how you sort of roll those experiences up into what you do at Notion and what community means at Notion.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Luckily, like it's such a wide. We have three big programs here at Notion that kind of focus on the community, and I've been really, really lucky enough to join a company here at Notion where it really is really important, and it's part of the core DNA, and it continues to be kind of today. Early on while building Notion, Ivan would spend his personal time reaching out to customers, responding to bug requests, bug submissions, like, just various requests that kind of, help shape Notion where it is today. Because he spent that time, right, getting to understand what customers were facing, what challenges they were facing, and how they could fix them. So it's like a big part of who we are. And then also the community itself has really allowed us to kind of come closer to our goal of making tool making ubiquitous, because there's so many user created resources, gatherings in person, online, and everything else. And that's why, like, my experience has been like really, really helpful because of a little bit of everything, right? I've done online communities over at Techeria. I've done, in-person communities at Startup Grind, and really all comes into play during the pandemic or previous to the pandemic. Actually, I'll kind of backtrack a little bit. A lot of the power of the Notion community was in-person gatherings. This is when Ben Lang kind of launched out and kind of rolled it out, and people were just on their own creating these really, really like, just intimate events where they were kind of teaching Notion, learning more about it, and kind of just expanding on it. And when the pandemic came, obviously we had to kind of put those on pause, and everyone kind of transitioned over to online. So when I joined in 2021, it was mostly online community focused, and we tried and failed many times to kind of get in-person events going again. HR team, legal's no, not safe enough, or like we get really close and backtrack. So luckily today, this past summer, now we're kind of just rolling these out again. So I get to kind of do a little bit of both, where we're doing these online events. So everyone can kind of easily join, learn more about the tool, learn more about how different people are using Notion around the world. But also we're finally having the opportunity to kind of slowly roll out these in-person gatherings again around the world. And when I was running around the summer, kind of launching everything with Ben, I had the chance to go out and travel, and we were able to go to APAC, we were able to go to Korea, Japan. Emma, one of our newest team members, went out to London and just had a chance to kind of meet people in person, and you just can't beat the magic of in-person gatherings. So again, it's kind of all a little bit of everything in one, but we've been able to kind of just test it all out, and very, very excited for 2023.
That is really exciting, and kudos to Emma, the newest team member, who is also meeting people in London. That's great to hear. So I'm really excited. You build, international communities, global communities, right? They're all over the world. Like you said, someone was in APAC, West Lemonade also was in Europe. And you mentioned this feeling of in-person gathering, right? And I think we've sort of seen now, at least when I'm talking to community members, there is this idea of online is useful because everyone can attend, but in person is so useful because there's this energy exchange that's just a bit different that you can't recreate necessarily, or I might argue you cannot recreate in that same way. And now there's a hybrid conversation going, like, how do you have an in-person event, but also bring people who can access it for one reason or another and make sure that they can access that knowledge sharing, some version of, watch parties? There are different ways I think that people are trying to sort of hybridize, bringing both that feeling of togetherness in person as well as that accessibility that online events can augment. So I'm wondering, how has the return of in-person events kind of changed your day to day, and maybe the way that you strategize at Notion, and how you're sort of bringing these dual functions of eventing together?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I am also very biased towards in-person events. At Startup Grind, in the early days, a lot of people would come to us like, hey, check out this app, or, check out this, program that makes it easier to facilitate, networking. You're like, no, let's just get in person, a handshake, a business card at that time, business cards, it really all kind of we thought it was just very, very special. And it truly is. I think, the pandemic definitely kind of humbled me in those ways, and in many different ways, right? Because we just weren't able to. And the cool thing about online events, like you said, accessibility. It's so much easier for people to kind of jump in and be a part of something that usually they wouldn't be. So definitely community and kind of a strategy of how we move forward has definitely changed a lot since this past summer, as we kind of were able to get back in person. So previously it was mostly just all online webinars, gatherings, socials. We use a variety of different tools to try to just kind of recreate that in-person feeling. And we had sessions to learn more about how to use Notion, how to grow your community. And then also just hey, let's just mess around and kind of co-work together, share stories about what we're up to, what we're doing this weekend, and just a little bit of everything. The beautiful thing about being back in person is you can finally, do it together in your local town, community, what have you. And it's been great. I think it was all kind of online planning up until this past August, when suddenly we got the okay to do in person. And now it's very much in-person focused, as we want to kind of, support those members that previously maybe weren't as engaged. A lot of members of our ambassador community, ambassadors, are some of our most engaged members around the world that kind of help teach Notion, and just part of all these growing communities online. We personally don't moderate or admin all the communities you see around Notion. They're run by these very, very engaged ambassadors, and we're always looking for new ways to support them. So when we started rolling out back in-person events, we're like, okay, how can we create guides? Can we create more opportunities for these members to get together and just meet each other again in person? We rolled out a grant program that's kind of internal to just these members, and for them to kind of just, help, I guess, pass on some of that cost that, comes from getting people together, where it's food, drinks. And some of the very, very first members that use this were one of our members in Ukraine, actually. And, it was so interesting because, like, finally the legal team, HR team's like, hey, you can do this again. And we're like, oh, great, this is awesome. And, like, the first request comes from Ukraine. And we're like, oh, interesting. So we went out, made sure it was safe, and, like, kind of, like, went through all the data, went through everything we could. And it was amazing. And their first session was, getting together and figuring out how they can volunteer in their local communities. How can they help the people around them? I think the second session was like, how can you organize your life and kind of just adapt to this new reality? And I mean, on one part, it was very challenging, right? Because that was like one of the first requests. But on the other, it was like, oh my gosh, like this is very impactful. You can't just recreate this. We're in such a unique place that we're able to help in this way that we really kind of got energized and just inspired to continue building it out. So right now, we're really kind of just putting together different resources, programs, and whatever we can to just allow more folks to get together, both in person and online.
That is, and maybe it's a community manager in me, but I always want people to know they're not alone. But that is a very humbling answer, as well as I think the pandemic was very humbling in terms of the other topic you mentioned where you're like, I feel like I was very humbled by that. And I was like, don't worry, you're not alone. I think many of us were. So it sounds like your event strategy, right? You're shifting it, you're being flexible with it, and you're trying to bring more in-person events back, which makes a ton of sense and is really exciting. It sounds like ambassadors are a huge part of that. And so I sort of want to talk about this shift of strategies, and maybe how you apply, the strategy of activating your ambassadors, or maybe even nurturing some community members to become ambassadors. And maybe that's part of the strategy. With also this idea that you're doing this internationally, right? You're doing all across the globe. So you're dealing with different cultures, different backgrounds, different perspectives, different experiences. In your background, you've previously managed 500 cities across 125 countries, which is extremely global. And so I'm wondering if someone were looking to expand international communities from a US-based company like Notion, do you have any recommendations around how they might approach that, around how they might be empathic of these different cultural perspectives and backgrounds, around what it means to activate perhaps an ambassador in one country versus another? And how people might assess an initial strategy? Like, what are some of those first steps you might recommend?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think the first is just listening to your community. I think that's the most key thing. I mean, even at Startup Grind, the founder, Derek Anderson, was essentially just hosting these, like, he was running his own startup, and then on the side, he was running these little meetups, right? Where it was just like, he'd invite some successful friend of his that was slightly more successful than himself, or, a different group of people. And then everyone would come together, listen to this person, hear about their journey and like kind of how they got to where they are today. And then, at the end, they would kind of like get together and talk about their own experiences and what they were learning. And he was like, it was really frustrating because I was noticing that these events were getting a lot more traction than my actual startup. And then it wasn't until someone came from LA that they were like, oh my gosh, this is such an amazing experience. Like, how can I bring this back to LA? And he's like, why? Well, what do you want to do? Just host an event? It's like, yeah, no, but I want to use like the Startup Grind name and bring it back with me. And that's how it kind of really began. Like, it's just someone else kind of came up, like offered to step in and wanted to do the same. I think at Notion, it was very similar. Like, Ben often talks about how there was just these events going on in New York, and like, they were nearby. They would just show up with stickers and then kind of like, oh, hey, what's going on here? And then like it was happening in Japan and just different parts around the world. And I think, it was pretty clear that the community, the members really wanted this. And then it kind of like building it out was kind of like, a logical next step. So what I would say is just keep an eye out, see if there's like a demand for this. I wouldn't like build it out and then like try to force people to do it. I think most of the time they'll let you know. And then once you know that people want to be doing this, like how can you best help them? Keep an eye out, see where there's most activity, like gauge where like some of these events are happening or where they would be most successful. Again, at Notion, it was such an interesting situation because some of the most active members were in Japan and Korea, which normally, for a US-based company, that isn't like the most obvious place for these things to kind of take off, but they kind of figured out a way to support them and made sure that they were kind of sending them out goodies, stickers, what have you, to kind of continue running these events and localizing a lot of the content that they needed to kind of, organize. And then it kind of spread from there. So I would just say, listen to your members, see where they're most active and see how you can help them. One of the things that's been really helpful is with Common Room, a huge shout out to Josh, who basically we had this event in Palo Alto, and we had a couple of other events. This is what we're just starting to roll out. It's like early summer, and we're testing out on our own. And like, we don't know if people are going to come or not. And it was so cool because we used Common Room to basically like track where people were most active and just see like, hey, like here's some people in Palo Alto that are really active on Twitter or what have you. And, just use these tools at your disposal to kind of just, build a list, reach out to people and see what happens. As a community manager, you have to be okay with going to an event and it's just like 2 or 3 of you or 4 of you, and like sometimes that has happened to me. It's happened to every community I've ever known. But look, like if 4 people are willing to take time out of their day just to get something up and going and just spend time with you, that's a win. That's a huge, huge win. It can only go up from there. And, don't stop and just figure out, how can we do it better next time? So we did that first event in Palo Alto. We had a lot more than expected. Huge shout out to Josh. He came through and just like everyone else was there. And it was just a wonderful time. And since then, I think this year we've had 150 events around the world. So it's been great.
That's awesome. And I think, okay, so kudos to you because I'm pretty sure when that event first rolled out, the one in Palo Alto, you did like location-based stuff, based using Common Room to figure out where people were located and who was most active. And I know that Slack is one of your connected sources. And I think you still invited all those people before we had bulk messaging available in Slack. Whereas now, like now, if you did that, it would be even faster, right? You'd be like location-based, bulk message directly to members in Slack. Would you like to come? And so like kudos to you for like taking all that time to send those individual invites manually, which now hopefully we would make it even more easier, even more easier, which I think is not grammatically correct, to invite those folks.
Yeah, but it makes sense. But it makes sense. That's all that matters.
Yeah. So talking about what a successful meetup or event looks like, right? And I feel you, right? Where I'm like, if 3 people came who are super engaged and really jazzed to be there, then that is a success, right? And I think like myself and community leaders and community managers, there's like different ways to look at it, right? Where business metrics might be like, well, show us some other metrics of success. And maybe that means, larger amplification, more reach, more people attending, more people talking about it afterwards. And anyway, there are all sorts of dimensions and ways that people might look at what success means. So often I'm like, 3 people came and they were so interested and we helped 3 people do better, do more with our product. And sooner or later that will pay back anyway. But I'm curious about how you talk about this at Notion, both internally with your community team members and also at that business level. What does a successful meetup or event look like? How do you measure success? What are some of those conversations happening in terms of like, okay, what should this look like and what do we hope the outcome is?
Yeah, no, I mean, as community managers, right, it's like 3 people show up. Like, we know it's a win. We know sometimes it's a little bit hard to convince others or to have you. Luckily at Notion, I think people just understand how it works. It kind of saw the rollout, pre-pandemic and how it kind of grew from there. I think for us right now, as we're rolling out this program, we're starting very small. I think at this point, it's just like, how many events are we hosting? How much interest is there to host events? And like, how many people are attending? And I think even at Startup Grind, it's the same thing where it's like, as long as there's more people coming to these events, the more that are hosted, I think it's always like a big win. Longer term, in the past, what I've done is really like, how consistent are these happening? Obviously, is the growth continuing to grow on? And then I think in today's world, like really is like, how much like buzz are we producing too, right? Like, I mean, are people connecting with each other? Are people like kind of sharing this? Are we creating like meaningful enough events where people are excited to put it on Twitter or put it on their socials? And I mean, great, engagement, blah, 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 and all the keywords, but really it's what it's about is just like, if people are having a good enough time to put it on their personal social media, then they're like, it was worth it for them to come out. And also like, they're probably getting a lot of value out of it. So another thing we like to track is like, are these events valuable? And if not, like, how can we, make them more so that like people have better resources, they can kind of like, learn the tool better, share it out more, and to really just kind of like get people more activated. We recently launched a campus leaders program here at Notion as well, where we're basically reaching out to a bunch of university students and kind of rolling it out there. And what we want to see is we love hearing these stories about like, hey, like 5 people came into the classroom today, they hadn't used Notion in the past, and they were like struggling to keep up with their notes, struggling to study, and like they came to the event and now everything's on Notion. And like, yes, it's like, we have new users, great. But really for us, it's like, okay, people are, becoming more productive. They're becoming more effective in their studies. And it's like, what can be more, helpful and satisfying than that? I think in the long run, as these events become bigger and as they become more successful, I think we're going to see a lot more engagement, a lot more activity, a lot more users. And again, it kind of just spreads from there, right? When we first did these first maybe 15 events, we really try to promote them internally within our own, communities. And just like, look, these are the cool things that are happening. And like, as people saw more and more of them, they're like, okay, I want to do that in like my town. How do I do that locally? And again, it kind of just spreads and grows from there. So I think what I would say is just making sure you're providing enough value where people are getting a lot out of these events, enough to kind of come back and also tell their friends, kind of grow the membership as the community grows. And also just, want to like get it exciting enough to where others are like excited to do their own event in their local town.
Yeah, I think thank you for teeing up my next question, which is like this idea, right, of starting with a community, providing value to a community member, and sooner or later, and oftentimes sooner, that value creation keeps giving back and giving forward rather to new community members. And so I'm curious, when you're looking at the industry and the growth of community, as you would say, like all the way from when community was a glorified name for an intern, I think is the way you said it, versus today, right? Where like community is an industry where people are starting to recognize it as a function of an organization. What are you most excited about as companies continue to realize the value of community across their business? And maybe to use maybe not a buzzword in some circles and in others maybe, but community-led growth, right? Like what does that mean to you, and how do you all approach that at Notion, or how do you approach it personally with your depth of experience?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think going back to your original question, like, the thing that I'm most excited about is just kind of getting like more legitimacy around community management. I think for a long time, it's just like the community manager did all these 10 things, and it was like hard to really kind of find the value in different ways. Like if it didn't like plug into X dollars around X time, then it wasn't worth the time. And what I'm really loving about this kind of shift in the industry is that they're taking it seriously. Like people are seeing the impacts of community. They're seeing how important it can be. I mean, Notion is a great example, but there's many, many others out there. We talked with some folks, Erica Cool from Salesforce and a bunch of others from around the industry. And it's just like, it's been amazing to see what they've been able to pull off. And really what I'm most excited for is more resources for community managers. Like for the longest time, and I think it still is today, right? Where it's like a lot of community managers are constantly finding for resources, attention to kind of bring into the program, because it's like, it's not instant. You really have to invest in community. It's the only way to do it, right? I talked earlier about how Ivan was literally like, personally, answering tickets with issues, bugs, whatever. And like, these things really help shape the tool. Notion is what it is today because, our community wrote in, let us know what was going on. We listened, and it kind of just scaled from there. So I think community-led growth is incredibly important. And there's for companies that are willing to kind of take the time, invest into it, and really kind of just wait to see the results, like it's going to pay back in many, many different ways. Obviously it's good for business. More importantly, it's like, what more could you ask for than like finding new and better ways to engage with your members, your users, your customers, and provide the most valuable possible for them.
So with that said, of course I want to dive into a little bit about Common Room, and it is our goal, right, to create tools that enable you to do what you want to do with your communities better at scale, with deeper engagement, understanding what people need when they need it with the right context, and then also bring your internal teams, like bring that cross-functional collaboration so they too can start to truly understand and draw that straight line from A to B about the impact of community. So if our tools can do any of that, and ultimate goal, right, all of that to assist you in that work, then I'm a super happy camper. So I would love to understand a little bit about, is your work different with Common Room, and maybe what's one way that you've used Common Room to augment your community work in the past month or the past quarter? What's something that sticks with you?
We recently did an internal wrap up of like all the amazing things that we did, within our community, all the achievements, lots of photos, lots of videos, lots of just heartwarming moments of just kind of looking back at everything we've accomplished together. But one of the things is normally like when I go back and like pull these metrics, I have to manually jump in there and like pull things one by one and kind of little count on my hands and just all the classic methods to do it. And, as we were putting together, Emma did an amazing job, and she jumped into Common Room, and she's like, and she pulled all these metrics out. I was like, oh my gosh, like that was like, it was a really fast turnaround. It usually takes me like a week to put all this together. And she's like, oh, I just went into Common Room. I looked at, what was our activity rate across the entire community? Were people most active, and what was our growth like? And Common Room just kind of presented that in such an easy format. We didn't have to like create our own internal Excel sheets and kind of, hunt things down and go back and, start from January and work our way back. It was just all there. And I think that's what I'm really excited about. And I really like about Common Room is, one, it allows us to kind of just quickly get a bird's eye view of, what's going on in our community, how active is it? And it allows us to kind of jump in there and then like follow with people that maybe aren't so active. So that's been absolutely great. Another thing that I think, and this is one of the main reasons we went with Common Room, is because kind of like I mentioned earlier, our communities aren't centralized, right? A lot of different companies, and again, that's a great way to do it. I think there's just different ways to run community. Is we noticed that Ben Lang early on, he really wanted to allow members to kind of run their own communities, however they saw fit. As you talk about international communities, international markets, international like everything, like there's certain nuances that like we're never going to get right. I remember there's a story. One of our designers previously worked at another tech company. And when you finish a task, a unicorn flies across the task and then it disappears. And I love that. It's my favorite feature about that tool, right? And I used to use it, back in the day. And then he was one of the ones who designed it. And I was like, oh my gosh, I love that feature. He's like, it's funny you say that because when we expanded out to Japan and in Japan and Germany, like we could not get customers because it wasn't professional enough. They're like, we can't have this tool. Like we can't have a unicorn flying across, someone's like on VP's desk, because it's ridiculous. So there's these little nuances. There's these little like, cultural differences that really matter and make a massive difference. And, early on, they're just like, let's let, these leaders, these admins kind of run their own communities. And it's been great. It's been a massive success because members learn the tool in their own, individual ways, but also like it just kind of takes in these like cultural ways of presenting things. And it's been amazing to see. And I've learned a lot. But the challenge with it is because all these communities are spread across these different platforms and different languages around the world, it can be very tough to kind of track our growth and more specifically track where our members are active. Like you can't force everyone to go onto one platform. You're a community manager, everyone listening, you know what I'm talking about. People are going to be in different platforms doing different things, which is great. It's awesome. It can be a bit of a challenge. So, if we have events, in on a platform called PTix instead of Luma or what have you, the cool thing about Common Room is at least within these individual members, we know where activity is going. We run all of our communities on Slack, but not everyone is super active on Slack. And a lot of times we're just like, oh, should this member stay because I don't really see them messaging or reacting anymore. But then they're publishing like these amazing content threads on Twitter, or they're posting, videos that are getting millions of views. And it's like, wait, how can we kind of leverage all these things and really kind of just, get a better idea of where everyone's at. And Common Room makes that so easy. Like if I go on a member, I use the tool, I can see, okay, maybe they're not active on Slack, but oh my gosh, look at their their Twitter following, or look at the impact on this post. So I think one of the things that I really, really appreciate about Common Room, and I really want to leverage even more going into the new year, is just being able to get a bird's eye view of all the activity all our core members are doing, and then kind of like really base engagement on that, which I think is a more holistic way to look at these things.
Yeah, you are right that I'm like, yes. But I admire you in that work. And it's like just that fundamental idea of meeting members where they are. Right. And I think you have your community interacts with you across more than this, but I think with Common Room, right. Or different platforms that you have within Common Room are, you have Slack, Discord, Twitter, GitHub, Stack Overflow, LinkedIn, Meetup. And so you're also meeting members where they are in the types of spaces they want to be in, right? Some are near real-time chat platforms, some are that more social media, some are going to be like developers and more interested in that like API type back-end work, and they have like Stack Overflow questions and they're making pull requests on GitHub, and then you have like the LinkedIn, so maybe that more professional, maybe more of the certain cultures that are like, don't give me that unicorn, and you're like, give me the unicorn. And so I just I love that. I love that it's like, it's not that you have to reduce the amount of surfaces that your community members can interact with you on. It's that how can you interact with them on all those surfaces and use a tool that allows you to get the insights that you need to serve them best where they want to be.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, again, it's not the easiest thing in the world, but I think it's worth it, right? Like meeting members where they're at and where they're most comfortable in. Again, we've seen these influencers, right? Like some of these influencers, they love YouTube, they're not going to be on TikTok, right? Or they love Twitter, they're not going to be on Facebook or what have you. So being able to just kind of like see all these platforms. And again, like, it's such a silly way, but like I always think about it, it's like kind of like testing, right? You can't, it's hard to test everyone on the same kind of level. So it's better just to create these like various opportunities and like let all these members shine in their own way.
I love that. And with that, I think you gave us the mic drop sentence, which is, it's not the easiest thing in the world, but it is worth it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
that's what
thank
community
you for
managers
that.
are, right? You got to do it the hard way. Absolutely.
Yeah, totally. You're like, do things that don't scale? Sign me up.
Yeah.
Is there anything you want to leave with the audience? perhaps how they might also achieve their own Guinness World Record, or any other advice that you'd like to leave us with.
Yeah, get out there, right? And kind of we talked about earlier, like story of my life, do things that don't scale early on. One of the first things that I did when I joined Notion was I opened up my calendar from 6 in the morning to 6 at night. And for 2 weeks, I just like begged people to jump on a call with me for 30 minutes and give me their feedback. And like my pitch was always the same. It was like, hey, I'm new here. I'm Francisco. I'm a community manager, but like I'm trying to support you as best I can. Can you please tell me honest feedback on how we can improve this program? What can we do better? How can I better support you? And don't hold back. Like, you can't hurt my feelings. And I think it was like because it wasn't my program at the time. And at Notion, we really we say this, we have this saying where it's like we consider feedback a gift. And so just don't be scared of feedback. Really listen to your members. Find an easy, accessible way for them to kind of like reach out and talk to you, and just make sure to like do what you can to kind of turn that into actionable changes across the program. So I don't know, that it again doesn't scale, isn't easy, but always worth it.
Man, that is next level. That is a great, wow, what an example. What an example to set 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Give me your feedback. It is a gift, which is also seasonally appropriate. So again, like you started us off with a seasonal appropriate thought idea, and you're going to end us with one too. So Francisco, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate you being here. Really appreciate your work in the community. And thank you for being an example to all of us.
Oh, no, thank you for having me. And again, I'm always happy to help, always on Twitter. So feel free to reach out, and always, happy to connect with anyone.
Oh, yeah. Wait, of course. I am remiss. Where can people catch up with you? Where can they find out more about you? What are your favorite
no worries at all. Yeah. I never used Twitter in the past, but since joining Notion, a lot of our community is there. So again, talking on the theme of meeting in there. So I'm always on Twitter these days. So Francisco CRZ is my hashtag, and always happy to chat.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Francisco.
Thank you.